ओके, तो जी जिसका हमें था इंतज़ार वो घड़ी आ चुकी है। आज हम स्टार्ट करेंगे हमारे स्प्रिंग बूट की कोडिंग और स्प्रिंग बूट को समझना। तो हाय, मेरा नाम है अक्षय अग्रवाल। हम लोग जावा पढ़ते पढ़ते फाइनली स्प्रिंग बूट स्टार्ट करने के स्टेप पे आ चुके हैं। इसके बाद हम अपने एप्लीकेशंस बनाएंगे और मज़े करेंगे होपफुली। तो फ़िलहाल के लिए हम लोग ऊप्स पढ़ के आए हैं, हमने एक्सेप्शन हैंडलिंग पढ़ा है, हमने डीएसए के कॉन्सेप्ट्स पढ़े हैं, हमने मल्टी थ्रेडिंग पढ़ ली है और इसके बाद हम स्प्रिंग बूट शुरू कर रहे हैं। जेडीबीसी फाइल हैंडलिंग ये सब हमने अभी नहीं किया है, आगे के स्टेप्स में हम करते जाएंगे जैसे जैसे हम इंटरव्यू की प्रिपरेशंस करेंगे और उस अकॉर्डिंग। तो फ़िलहाल के लिए हम अपनी स्प्रिंग बूट शुरू करते हैं। जिस वीडियो से हम ये सब पढ़ेंगे वो एक 5 घंटे की वीडियो है तेलेस्कू की। हम ऑलरेडी तेलेस्कू से पढ़ चुके हैं बहुत बार, और पहले भी पर्सनली मुझे वो चैनल पसंद है। बहुत सारे कॉन्सेप्ट्स मेरे तेलेस्कू से क्लियर हुए हैं। तो जावा के लिए एक अच्छा चैनल है और हम लोग उसको यूज़ करके, उस वीडियो को यूज़ करके बेसिकली उससे पढ़ेंगे तेलेस्कू से। नवीन रेड्डी सर का चैनल है, मज़ा आएगा। तो ठीक है, सब कुछ सेट है ऑलरेडी, बस हमें स्टार्ट करना है। तो चलते हैं विंडो स्क्रीन पे। कूल, ओके लेट्स स्टार्ट। इस बीच अगर तुम्हारी कोई क्वेरी हो या तुम्हें कुछ कहना है तो कमेंट्स में बता सकते हो। मैं एक कमेंट कर देता हूँ, कैन ठीक है, डन, स्टार्ट भाई। ये हमारा कौन सा लाइव? आई थिंक 19th है ना?
Welcome back,
Good.
aliens. My name is Davin Reddy, and in this video, we'll talk about Spring Framework. When you talk about the enterprise
Nice.
market, the most famous language there is Java, because when you want to build huge applications which are scalable, secure, Java is preferred. And one of the biggest ecosystem for the enterprise applications is in Java. And the framework, the most famous framework for Java is Spring. Now, when I say most famous, there are other frameworks as well, which are quite famous, but not more than Spring, because it solves the problem of developers. See, Spring started in 2003. It's not a new framework, right? It's old. It's been 21 years now. The reason it started is to solve the problem of Java EE. Java EE is used to build enterprise application, and it was great. The only problem is it was complex and heavy. To make it lightweight, to make it simple, Spring came up with a project. And of course, initially it was a project, but later on, they added some more projects. So initially it was Spring Framework, which provides some features. And later on, they started adding more modules to it. And now when you say Spring, it's not just a framework or a project, it's basically an umbrella. It has multiple sub-projects to it. And whenever you want to build enterprise-level solutions, and not just that, even if you want to make a simple application, you can use Spring. One of the issues a lot of people talk about Spring is it's heavy, it's you have to write a lot of codes in Java, not with the latest version of Java and not with Spring Framework. Spring basically has something called Spring Boot, and using that, you can build your first API in minutes. Maybe 2 minutes. Is that fast? Spring
Nice.
Framework, it's fun. It has multiple modules. So let me just head towards this Spring Framework or Spring website. So you can go to spring.io, and it has details about everything. So what is Spring? You can see they have different events coming up. Ignore that. So what you can do with Spring is you can build microservices, you can build reactive applications, you can build for cloud, you can build web applications, serverless. I mean, multiple options are there. But the beauty is, if you go to the Spring projects, now this is a project, and if you expand this, it's huge. When I say huge, I just have to click on view all projects. And every time I go to this place, there's a chance that there will be new project added. Example, we got Spring Boot. I was talking about it is one of the easiest way to build projects. We got Spring Framework, Spring Cloud, Spring Data, Spring Security, Spring AI. So yeah, we can also build AI applications using Spring now. We got thing which I use, Spring Web Services. And there are other projects as well, which you can see here. Initial days, we used to keep everything in one section, but now we have separate sections for it, the extra projects. So this are the projects which we have in Spring. So basically it provides you a lot of different features. One of the best features about Spring, and that's how it started, is dependency injection. What exactly it is, we'll talk about in the upcoming videos. The plan is to actually create the entire series for Spring. And you might be saying, hey, we already have that on channel. What we have on channel is Spring 5. We're talking about Spring 6. And for that, basically, I need motivation. Of course, it will take a lot of time and I need motivation from you. Of course, I will motivate you to learn and practice it. You have to also motivate me to keep making videos. You can do that by commenting on this video. Also like the video so that I will know that, yes, I have to spend enough time and energy to make this series and you are waiting for it.
Agreed.
So let me know that by liking the video. Comment something in the videos, maybe Spring or waiting for the next video. I need comments that give me the motivation, and it also helps the YouTube algorithm to promote the video. Right? So you can do that in the comments, and maybe the setting the target is a new trend. So maybe let's say 50 comments. Let's start slow and then we'll build up. So yeah, in the entire series, the plan is to actually talk about dependency injection, Spring Core, Spring Web. You can build web application using Spring, and we have talked about the project here. So we have that in the Spring. We can have Spring Web. We can also have Spring Data JPA for database connectivity. We'll talk about Spring Boot. How do you build application? So the idea is to also make videos on Spring security. We have talked about Spring data, also the cloud applications, cloud deployment. And again, I need your motivation there. We have talked about what is Spring, and then we have discussed that we can build applications, the enterprise application, web application with the help of Spring Framework. And before we talk about the actual topic and discuss what other components are, let's talk about the project we are going to do. Of course, right, when you are learning something, you want to do some projects side by side. Now, this is a project which you're going to build. Of course, this doesn't look like a good UI, but that doesn't matter. We are learning here Spring Framework, not HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? So let's focus on the features of the backend. And just to show how it will look on the front end, of course, designing can be a different thing. You can help me in that. But this is what we're going to build. Now we are trying to build a simple e-commerce website. Of course, we cannot build Amazon here. That's a huge application, but a simple e-commerce website where someone can lease their products and someone can buy it. Of course, we're not doing the end-to-end part of sending the product from the warehouse to the client, but at least a person should be able to add to the cart or something like that. So this is what we're going to build, of course, from scratch, and while learning a concept. So let's say if we talk about one concept, and we'll see how do we include that concept in this project, and slowly we are going to build this. So this is not what you will see in the first video after this. You will see something blank and we don't have anything there. We'll build from scratch, okay? But before we talk about this, let's set the target. So as I mentioned before, for the first video of Spring, we set the target for 50 comments. This time,
अच्छा ये ऐड किए हुए हैं वीडियोस ओके ओके एक सेकंड ज़रा मैं नोट स्क्रीन देख लेता हूँ सेट है ओके कूल सॉरी
since we got a good response, let's set the target for 200 comments. Okay, that's how I'll be motivated for the next video. So please motivate me. Make sure that we complete the target of 200 comments.
Nice.
So coming back here, this is what we're going to build. So this is the home page. Now on the home page, I can see certain products here. I can see a laptop or a fan or a telephone or a Dio. Of course, they should have some images as well, but we'll see how do we put that here later. Or you can help us if you are good with UI. You will find the link in description. So let's say if I want to buy a fan. So if I click on fan here, this is the detail about the fan. This is a fan icon. We got the product name, the brand, description, and the price. Then we got an option of add to cart. Then we got stock available 5, product listed on this date. And even I can update this. I should be able to update this detail. Maybe I want to say the description is not just top speed, but also silent fan or something like that. So in that case, I should be able to update it. And we should be able to delete this. Example, if I click on delete, now it's gone. You can see fan is not there. Okay, so we have to refresh the homepage. Yeah, so the fan is not there. So this is how basically you can add, update, and delete the products from the page. Also, we can sort this by category. Example, here we got Dio in fashion. So you can see the category is fashion here. And if you see this telephone, this is in electronics. So we should be able to sort the products based on the category. It's not complete yet, but we'll build it. We'll build to categorize it. And if I go back to homepage, this is what you will see. If I go to Telesco here, that takes you to the Telesco homepage. This is the official page of Telesco. Go back here. And yeah, this is what I want. Also, I should be able to search the product, and it's not implemented yet. No problem, we'll do that. Cool, so this is what we have. Now this is what you're going to build. Now, if I want to show you the code for this, this is the code for the existing project. You can see we have two sections here. We got a backend and we got a front end here. Let me close all the code files because I don't want to confuse you with the code files. Okay, so we got a front end and we got a backend here. Now front end is built with React. Again, this is not a React playlist, so we are not going to focus on the React one, but I will show you how the React code looks like. But not in this video, in the other video. And then this is the backend. This is what we need to build. So example, let's say if I give you just a front end, of course you will see the page, but then the page will not have any products because the backend is not there. So we have to slowly build this backend to give something to the front end.
ठीक है, ऑनेस्टली मुझे रिएक्ट अभी नहीं आता, तो मैं थोड़ा घबराया हुआ हूँ इस मोमेंट पे, पर देखते हैं कहाँ जाती है ये बात.
Okay, that's what you're going to build. And let's say if you don't want to build a front end, you don't want to work with React, you can also test this with your REST clients. It can be Postman or some other clients. Let me know in the comments with what client you have used before apart from Postman. Okay, so this is what we are going to build, and
Swagger.
this is basically a web application.
Swagger API मिलते हैं हमको, वो भी कूल है काफ़ी. ठीक है, किसी ने बोला है Swagger. Swagger, ठीक है, कोई बात नहीं.
But then when you talk about Spring, we're not going to directly start with web application. We'll start with the Spring code. What if you want to build a standalone application and you want to achieve the same thing where you should be able to list the products or delete the products? How we are going to do that? So we'll start with that and then we'll move towards the web part. And remember, the target for this video is 200 comments. Also, if I can get 500 likes, that will be awesome. Now to this point, we have talked about what is Spring, and then we have seen the project which we are going to build. But when you want to learn a Spring framework, there are certain things which you should know and you should have in your machine. The first thing you need to know in Spring is Java. So the prerequisite is the Java language. Of course, right, when you're learning a framework, you need to also know a language on which you're going to build. So you need to know Java from start to end. So when I say end, there's actually no end, but at least you should know till threads and exception handling and collection. So basically I'm talking about the syntax of Java, loops, conditional statements, how do you work with array, working with exceptions, threads and collection. Maybe threads is not that important, but you should know it. Collection is very important, and one of the most important thing is the OOPS concept. So OOPS and interfaces, abstraction, those things are very important. Next, when you talk about framework, we also need a build tool. So when you work on a project, there are certain build tools which you have to use. In fact, any one, either it can be Maven or Gradle. So in this particular series, we are going to use Maven. But if you know Gradle before, it will be easier for you to understand Maven. And if you don't know any of this, Maven is preferred for this series. Next, you need to also know about database connectivity, because anyway, we are going to connect our Spring application with database. So if you know JDBC, it will be easier for me to explain you the connectivity there. Then you have to understand Hibernate. See, we are going to use Spring Data JPA here, and then I'm not going to explain how things are working behind the scenes because that's a part of Hibernate concept. So you need to know Hibernate so that you can understand Spring Data JPA properly. And also, if you can work with XML files, that will be better. So get used to XML JSON, because of course this course is not about JSON and XML. We will be doing some configuration in XML, and the passing of data between the client and a server will be done with the help of JSON format. So you should know what is JSON. Now question arises from where you're going to learn this. So don't worry, you are basically covered. So in the description, you will find the videos for this. Basically, you will find the video for a complete Java course where you get Java, Maven, Hibernate in one video. It also has Spring, but it has Spring 5. We are going to learn Spring 6 here. So till Spring, you can learn everything. And for JSON also, there will be video. XML also, there will be video. So make sure that you complete those. So those are the prerequisites before you start with the course. Also, you need to have certain things in your machine. Example, you need JDK. Of course, right? Java development kit because you're working on Java. Then you also need a editor. Of course, you can use Notepad here, but then maximum time you will spend in debugging and stuff. So prefer if you can use IDE, which stands for Integrated Development Environment. Now there are multiple options here, and you can use whatever you want to use. Example, we can use VS Code. We can use Eclipse, we can use IntelliJ IDEA, and there are multiple tools, but I can work on this three properly, so I'm naming this. VS Code is good, but it's not optimized for Java. They are still working on it. It's not there yet. So if you are happy with VS Code, please continue with it. Because I'll see, ultimately we are using a Maven for a build tool and for the project structure. It doesn't matter which IDE you're going to use, the project structure will remain same. You can also use Eclipse, which is open source and free. And it's one of the best tool available for Java development. So Eclipse, you can use enterprise version. And then comes IntelliJ IDEA. Now the thing is, IntelliJ IDEA is great, but they have two versions. One is a community version, and second is the ultimate version. The community version is free. The ultimate version is paid. Now, if you are sure that you're going to work on Java on different projects, and if you join a company, you're going to use IntelliJ IDEA, I would suggest you to explore the ultimate version. It's awesome, especially for students. They give you discount or free. You can check it out, but it's great. Community version is also good, and we are going to use community version here. And you will be saying, hey, you know, in community version, we don't have all the features. You know what? We don't need all the feature when you're learning things. And also, if you're building a small project and if you have a small team, community version works. But of course, if you want some advanced features, if you want to boost your productivity, explore the ultimate version, at least give it a try for a trial version. So yeah, that's about the tools, the things which are needed in your machine, and you're good to go. For
कुल मिला के हम लोग यूज़ करेंगे VS कोड. हम Eclipse अभी फ़िलहाल यूज़ नहीं करना चाहते. कोई ख़ास रीज़न नहीं है इसके पीछे. बस आई थिंक कभी बहुत टाइम से मैं VS कोड यूज़ कर रहा हूँ, और आई एम क्वाइट कॉन्फिडेंट इन दैट कि VS कोड में हो जाएगी मोस्ट ऑफ द थिंग्स, और इस प्रोजेक्ट के तो हो जानी चाहिए. आई थिंक दैट. अब Eclipse ID का देखना पड़ेगा. Eclipse आई डोंट प्रेफर एक्चुअली. सेकंड क्या बताया? इंटेलिज आई वर्कड ऑन. उसमें हमें क्या कहते हैं, सब्सक्रिप्शन या सब्सक्राइब करना पड़ता है, या क्या कहते हैं उसे, परचेज़ करना पड़ेगा बेसिकली. तो उसके मूड में हम लोग नहीं हैं अभी. तो वी विल बी यूजिंग VS कोड. देखते हैं आगे क्या होता है. ओके, बताइए सर.
for JDK, the version is go for about 17 because
Above 17, let's check. Java version. Above 17, we have 21. Okay, we are good here.
if you want to work with Spring 5, JDK 8 works. For Spring 6, minimum you need JDK 17. I have JDK 21 here in this machine, so I'm going to use that. Again, if you want to use it, you can also use 22 version, but LTS versions are better. So stick to 21 and that perfectly works. So yeah, that's a prerequisite and the tools required for this particular course. Now, till this point, we have talked about what is Spring. We have talked about the prerequisites. And then when we talked about Spring Framework, we introduced a term there called dependency injection, but that was just a name. What exactly this concept means? In fact, in this video, we'll not just talk about dependency injection, but also IOC, because Spring started with this concept. Of course, it has a lot of features, but then this remains the core of it. So what exactly these two terms are? So before we talk about it, the target for this video is 200 comments. Okay, so let's talk about IOC. See, when you talk about a typical application, it can be a web application or the enterprise application. See, ultimately, you want to give this application for your clients, right? So you have a client. Now, this can be a browser. This can be your mobile application, doesn't matter. And then what you want on the screen is data. So most of the application are data-driven application. You use it for the data, right? And typically, this data is stored in a database. Now, it doesn't matter is it a SQL database or no SQL database, that's a different topic. The point is, the data is coming from database or maybe from some external service. But then how do you send your data from database to client? And that's where you write this server-side code, right? Now, in Java, we can do that with the help of servlet. So somewhere in between, you need a system which will interact with the database, right? So when a client sends a request, you get the response back, and then your application interacts with the database, right? Now, this can be a standard application. This can be a web application as well. If it is web application, you use servlet in between. So this box here represents a servlet, or this is done with the help of servlet. But now we are talking about Spring, right? And a typical application, how it will look like. We normally create multiple layers. So of course, we'll talk about this in detail when we talk about Spring Web, but typically we have multiple layers in between. Just to show you here, so we got a layer here. Of course, this will be a class in Java, and then we have one more layer here. Of course, this will be a class, and we have one more layer here. So the role of this particular layer here is to accept the client request. The role of this layer is to do any business logic, and the role of this layer is to connect with database, right? So we have different classes for different work here, right? Typically, they are called as controllers, services, and repositories, right? So don't go with this short form, doesn't matter. We have different layers, that's important. Now, the dependency becomes here is, if you have a controller here who wants to talk to a service class, basically in Java, everything is object, right? So basically we have to work with the concept of object-oriented programming. And everything in Java is an object. That means if you want to work with service in the controller, we have to create object of a service inside the controller. So what I'm saying is, imagine there's a class called controller, the object of service, right? So this is a, you have to basically create the object of it, and Java is object driven. Same applies to the service. Let's say if service wants to work with the repository, imagine there's a class called service, and in this class, of course, you need to use some features of repository. We have to create object of repository here, and mind you, this is not the object, this is just a reference. We have to literally create an object by using a new keyword. That means in Java, this is only 3 classes, right? Imagine if you have a Java application which has thousands of classes. Okay, now that's exaggerated. Let's say you have hundreds of classes. So you have to create a class, you have to create an object of one class in another class, and not just for one, we have multiple classes there. So what if, let's say we have a philosophy here by saying, hey, let me make the work of Java developers simple. What if there is some external power who says, hey, Java developer, in your application, you focus only on the logic. Let me handle the object creations. That's a philosophy, right? So let someone else take care of it. And as a Java developer, now you're happy, is because you'll be saying, what's difficult in object creation, right? We can simply use a new keyword and object can be created. See, it's not that simple. When you say you are creating an object, you have to manage the entire cycle of it. It's not just about creation, it's also about managing the object, destroying the object, right? And we don't do that, right? We simply create the object, depend upon how many requests we get. For every new request, we get new object. And sometimes we don't need multiple objects. And still we do it. We create those objects. So what if you say, hey, let me focus on the logic, let someone else in the world take care of it. That's the concept of IOC, which stands for inversion of control. So what it means is, typically, we create the object by ourselves. That means we have a control on the object creation. But what if you give it to someone else? That is inversion of control. You're giving the control to someone else, right? That's IOC. But then IOC is just a principle. It's a philosophy. So we need certain technique to do it. And that's where the concept of dependency injection comes here. So dependency injection is the actual implementation of IOC. So how do we implement IOC in Spring or in Java? Is with the help of dependency injection. It's a concrete technique. So a lot of people get confused between IOC and DI, and they think they are similar. Yes, they do the same thing, almost the same thing, but IOC is a principle, right? And the dependency injection is the design pattern. It's the actual thing which we do. So in Spring, to achieve IOC, we use DI, dependency injection. So what we are saying is, we have some external thing. In this case, it is Spring. Spring says, you don't worry. Every time you want an object, just ask for the object. I will give it to you. That is injecting the object. It sounds cool, right? So that means if you talk about this particular example here, where you have a controller and a service. So let's say a controller here needs the object of service. We don't have to actually say new service. That's not our job here.
Okay.
You can simply say inject. You can ask Spring Framework to inject the object. You just mention the reference, Spring will give you the object. that is called the dependency injection. So basically, there are three techniques to achieve dependency injection. One is the constructor injection. So what you do in the controller class is you create a constructor, and in that constructor, you pass the reference of service. And you say, now, since I need service here, inject the object. That's one way. The second way is setter. So maybe you can create a setter methods for that service reference, and you can do the setter injection. The third way of doing is the field injection. So in Java, we have a concept of loose coupling. Basically, what you do is you don't have a concrete implementation of one class and the other. You code for the interfaces, right? So if you use a field injection, somewhere you're stopping it. You're not able to mock test and all those stuff. Again, it will make much more sense once we go forward. So field injection is not recommended. You can go for constructor and setter. We are going to use field injection in this course, but we'll also focus on constructor and setter. So that's dependency injection. That simply means someone else is injecting the object in your application, and that someone else in our case is a Spring framework. So I hope it makes some sense, and once we start implementing it, it will make much more sense. So before we talk about Spring Boot, the target for this video is 250 comments. Now till this point, we have talked about Spring framework, right? And we are excited to understand how this framework works and whatever things it promises, how it deals with that. So yes, Spring framework is amazing, right? And whatever application we are going to build now is with the help of Spring. So let's say you want to build an application. This can be anything in the world.
थामो 2 मिनट, हमने 2-4 बातें कर ली हैं. ओके ओके ओके, एक बार नोट स्क्रीन पे चलते हैं. एक बार रिफ्रेश करना पड़ेगा भाई. ये तो धीरे धीरे बढ़ रही हैं चीज़ें. मस्त है. तो हमने बेसिकली क्या बात करी? हमने बात करी IOC की, IOC, और दूसरी हमने बात करी डिपेंडेंसी इंजेक्शन की. आओ ज़रा अच्छे से. डिपेंडेंसी इंजेक्शन. तो IOC जो है वो एक कॉन्सेप्ट है. क्या कॉन्सेप्ट है कि तुम अपना काम करो, ये क्रिएशन और डिलीशन हम देख लेंगे. हम कौन है यहाँ पे? कौन देख लेगा? स्प्रिंग. ओके. एक कॉन्सेप्ट की ऑब्जेक्ट क्रिएशन की चिंता छोड़ो, तुम अपना काम करो. हम संभालेंगे ऑब्जेक्ट का लाइफ साइकिल. क्रिएशन और डिस्ट्रॉय भी यही करेगा, तो लाइफ साइकिल पूरा हमारा स्प्रिंग मैनेज करेगा. ठीक है. और IOC इस कॉन्सेप्ट का इम्प्लीमेंटेशन, ये क्या है? ये एक इम्प्लीमेंटेशन है. इम्प्लीमेंटेशन ऑफ IOC. इस कॉन्सेप्ट का इम्प्लीमेंटेशन है डिपेंडेंसी इंजेक्शन. 3 तरह से हो सकता है. पहला है कंस्ट्रक्टर, दूसरा बताया सेटर. वाह, दिमाग उल्टा चल रहा है आज. और एक है हमारा फील्ड लेवल पे, मतलब फील्ड लेवल पे, जिसमें इन्होंने बोला था पार्शियली होगा ये. ठीक है. ये हमारा नॉट रिकमेंडेड है. ठीक है. ये रिकमेंडेड नहीं है, ये दोनों रिकमेंडेड हैं, पर हम इसको भी यूज़ करेंगे. अब ये सब क्या है ये हम लोग अभी वीडियो में देखेंगे. फ़िलहाल इतनी बात हमने की है. ठीक है. कि एक IOC करके कॉन्सेप्ट है. क्या कॉन्सेप्ट है ये? इन्वर्जन ऑफ कंट्रोल. इन्वर्जन ऑफ कंट्रोल का मतलब कि ऑब्जेक्ट क्रिएशन की रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी कोडर की होती थी, अब हम कोडर को नहीं दे रहे. स्प्रिंग बोल रहा है कि मैं खुद से संभालूंगा भाई ये वाला पार्ट. तो संभालो खुद से, अच्छी बात है. काम बांट के काम करेंगे तो और अच्छे से होगा. तो ये स्प्रिंग संभालेगा IOC कॉन्सेप्ट को यूज़ करके. तो स्प्रिंग का एक मेन फीचर कोई अगर हमें पूछे तो वो IOC का हो गया. IOC कैसे यूज़ करता है? यूजिंग ये हमारा डिपेंडेंसी इंजेक्शन. ठीक है. डिपेंडेंसी इंजेक्शन कितने तरीके से हो सकता है? 3 तरह से हो सकता है. अभी हम वीडियो में जैसे आगे बढ़ेंगे उसमें देख लेंगे. कूल. तो चलते हैं वापस अब वीडियो पे. प्रथमेश, हेलो भाई, क्या हाल है? बहुत बढ़िया प्रथमेश यार, आप बताओ. ठीक है, तो कहाँ थे हम? विंडो स्क्रीन पे वापस चलते हैं।
world.
बताओ सर।
Even it can be a huge application or it can be a application for hello world. Typically, what happens is when you want to build the application, of course, you have your Java code with you. And
ठीक
then
है।
to make it work, Spring says, hey, doesn't matter how many classes you have, I will take care of the object creation. And you are quite happy because now
इन्वर्जन ऑफ कंट्रोल की बात हो रही है, मस्त।
now you don't have to worry about the objects. Spring says, I will take care of it. So let's say in your application, you have 3 classes and you say, hey, Spring, create object of these 3 classes. And Spring is happy to do that. So let's say in your application now you have 100 or 1000 classes. Can Spring handle all the objects? Of course it can. But the question is, do you want Spring to handle all the classes? Most of the time, we don't even want the object of few classes. Let's say
Nice.
you have a lot of classes here, and out of all these classes, you need objects of only few classes. How do you talk
Makes
to your
sense.
Spring framework by saying, hey, don't create objects for everything. I don't want all those things. I just want few. Spring says, okay, tell me which one you want. And that's where when you talk to the framework, we have to do that in the configuration file. It can be XML file or it can be a property file, but you have to talk to the framework. That means just because you're using a framework, you will not be able to run your code in the first go. You have to first do the configuration. Next part. Let's say if you're building a web application. Now, if you want to run your web application, basically you need a server. In terms of Java, we need something called a Tomcat server. Of course, we have multiple options. Let's say if you're building a web application in Spring, you need to have a Tomcat server. That means in your machine, even before you run your code, you have to make sure that you have installed Tomcat, you have configured Tomcat, then only you can run your application. So you'll be saying, hey, what's wrong with that? I mean, of course, we can do configuration, we can install Tomcat. See, the problem is when you have a long project, it makes sense to spend few hours or days doing the configuration because the project will go for a year. But what if you are doing some experiment? What if you want to get started in few minutes? See, most of the languages nowadays, they are doing that. If you talk about Python or JavaScript, they have their frameworks. And if you want to at least print hello world, you can do that in minutes. Now, this is what Spring was lacking way back and Java was lacking way back. And that's where we got something called a Spring Boot. Now, Spring Boot says all your problems of configuration, let me take care of it. What if you can get your project running in few minutes? And that's what Spring Boot gives you. It's not a new project, it's there from a long time, but it basically solves your problem of building a project in less time. So does it mean that Spring Boot is different from Spring Framework? Not exactly. See, underlying, it's all Spring Framework, right? On top of that, you have one more layer of Spring Boot. So you can actually build application directly using Spring Framework, or if you want to make it easy, you can use Spring Boot. Again, that's an optional stuff. But this optional thing is very, very important, and it will make your work faster. So basically, we can use a Spring Boot, which is a opinionated framework, which means it will give you certain things the way it wants, and you can simply use it to run your application. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So let's say if I go to the spring.io, the official website, and instead of this website, if I just say start.spring.io, it will take you to a website. Now see, when you talk about building a
रुको रुको, हम भी स्प्रिंग आयो हटाओ। स्टार्ट। तो बेसिकली स्प्रिंग बूट में अपना ये टॉमकेट सर्वर की हमें ज़रूरत नहीं है, ऐसा कुछ है ना? इनबिल्ट सर्वर है, ऐसा कुछ।
project in different IDEs, we have an option of directly saying a new project, and you can create a Spring project. In Spring project, basically you create a Maven project. Again, we'll see that in some time or in the upcoming videos. But basically you have to create a Maven project, add the Spring dependency, a lot of different steps, right? IntelliJ IDEA Ultimate version gives you an option of creating a Spring Boot project directly. But since we are not going to go for the Ultimate,
रुक जाओ यार, ये बात मैंने VS कोड में भी देखी थी। रुको 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 रुको, एक्सटेंशंस में क्या परेशानी है? रीलोड रिक्वायर्ड, हाँ लो यार रीलोड। ऑल सेट ऑल सेट ऑल सेट। क्या नाम है इसका? स्प्रिंग नाम है ना? स्प्रिंग बूट, स्प्रिंग इनिशियलाइजर। जावा सपोर्ट, स्प्रिंग बूट डैशबोर्ड, स्प्रिंग बूट टूल्स है हमारे पास। एक्सटेंशंस 4 मिलियन, 3 मिलियन, 3.4 मिलियन, 2.6 मिलियन डाउनलोड्स हैं। तो वो भी है कि ठीक है, 4 स्टार्स 5 स्टार्स हैं, तो मतलब हम यूज़ कर सकते हैं, सेफ टू यूज़ है, ऐसा कुछ फटेगा नहीं हमारा। अब ये इनिशियलाइज़र हम फिलहाल इसको यूज़ देखते हैं, जैसे नवीन सर करेंगे वैसे कर लेंगे, बट है हमारे पास मतलब वी एस कोड में ऑप्शन ये वाला। ओके। मुझे टाइम टू टाइम चेक करना पड़ रहा है कि हमारे वी एस कोड में सेम है नहीं, या हमें इंटेलिजे पे मूव करना पड़ेगा। अभी तक आई थिंक वी हैव एवरीथिंग।
version, we don't want to pay for it, we have a good alternative. What you can do is you can go to Spring Initializer, which is this
हाँ,
website, start.spring.io, and you can mention what kind of project you're building. So I'm building a Maven project. This is a build
रुको यार, हम इससे बना के देखें एक बार। स्विच टू प्री रिलीज वर्जन। ओके, पता नहीं है मुझे ये सब। ठीक है, अब कैसे काम करेगा ये? गिट लेंस का हमारे पास ये है, स्प्रिंग का कहाँ है? pom.xml में जाके कुछ तो किया। ठीक है ठीक है, देखते हैं देखते हैं। फिलहाल हम इसको अनइंस्टॉल कर रहे हैं। हम जो स्टार्ट स्प्रिंग है उससे कर लेंगे काम, कोई बात नहीं। ठीक है।
build tool. The language I'm
Maven
going for is
project,
Java.
Maven, Java.
And then the Spring Boot version. So this is the update version. So you can see we have 3.2.5. We can even go for the RC1, but I just want to stick to the stable one, which
is
3.2.5.
3.2.5 snapshot. ओह, 3.3.5 आ गया हमारे केस में। 1721 है हमारे पास जावा। चलें चलें 3.5 में, या स्टेबल क्या 3.4 में चल रहे हैं? स्नैपशॉट का मतलब क्या होता है? व्हाट डज स्नैपशॉट It is development version that precedes the final release version. You can identify the snapshot version of the Maven project by suffix snapshot. तो स्नैपशॉट वर्जन बेसिकली अभी डेवलपमेंट में है, तो उसमें इश्यूज आ सकते हैं, तो हम स्नैपशॉट यूज़ नहीं करेंगे, स्टेबल यूज़ करेंगे। तो 3.2.10 यूज़ करने क्या, क्योंकि 2.5 यूज़ कर रहे हैं तो वो ज़्यादा क्लोज होगा। ठीक
And
है।
depending upon when you're watching this, you can just use that particular version. The group, I
लेटेस्ट यूज़ करते हैं एक बार, रुको यार, ये M3 लिख के ना थोड़ा कंफ्यूज किया। 3.3.4 यूज़ करेंगे हम। चलो जी, आप
will
बताओ।
say com.tedisco, and the project name is, let's say, demo app, and then the packaging is
jar, ओके, डेमो ऐप, com.example, com.first project कर देते हैं, project, com.first project dot my demo, या डेमो ऐप, ये नाम सेम रख सकते हैं हम भी। ठीक है।
going for Java. Now this is where the beauty lies. You know, if you talk about the Spring framework or any web application in Java, you can create a project, and if you want to deploy it on the cloud, basically you create a var file. So var stands for web archive, and then you basically push your var file in the Tomcat to run it. Multiple steps, right? Spring Boot says, don't worry, you can create a jar file. But the problem is jar file, we cannot run jar file on the Tomcat. Then how it would work? What if you don't need external Tomcat? What if the project itself has a Tomcat? I mean, that will be awesome, right? So basically, Spring Boot says if you want to build a web project, you will get a embedded Tomcat. So I will select jar and I'll show you what embedded Tomcat I'm talking about. And then I can select my Java version. So in this machine, I got Java 21.
एक मिनट, हमने वर्जन चेक किया था ना, 21 है हमारा भी। ओके,
So I will go with that. It is LTS version, so it's safe to use. And dependencies. So what are things we need? So of course, if you remember when we talked about Spring Framework, I mentioned that there are multiple projects inside Spring, and we don't need all. Depending upon your use case, you will choose one. So I will click on Add Dependencies. So you can see there are a lot of options here to choose from, and you don't have to know everything. Use whatever you need. Example, here I want to build a web application, so I will simply say Spring Web. If you want to add database connectivity, you can also add JPA, but we don't need that at this point. If you want to get a Lombok support, you can choose that. If you want to use GraphQL, you can use that. So as I mentioned, there are so many options here, but I just want to stick to one, which is Spring Web, and click on Generate. Now, before I click on Generate, I will show you how this configuration looks like. So it will give you the entire configuration. We can see we got a dependency, which is Spring Boot Starter Web here. The Java version is 21. This is my project name. And this is the Spring Boot version which we are using. And behind this, it will use Spring Framework. I will show you the code. So click on Download. You can even click on the Generate here. So you can see in the downloads, I got this project, which is Demo App. What I will do is I will just unzip it. So unzipping is done on the other screen, but
रुक जाओ, अदर स्क्रीन हमारे पास फिलहाल नहीं है, नहीं है, तो हम डॉक्यूमेंट्स में जाके करेंगे ये सब काम. डाउनलोड्स, डेमो को कट करो यहाँ से, कॉपी, डेस्कटॉप डॉक्यूमेंट्स में स्प्रिंग बूट ट्यूटोरियल नहीं है, माई कूल ऐप प्रोजेक्ट, ये सब डिलीट करो, नहीं चाहिए, और यहाँ पे रखो, इसको भी हटाओ. चलो नया फोल्डर बना देते हैं ना, स्प्रिंग बूट एप्स, और स्प्रिंग बूट एप्स के अंदर हम पेस्ट कर देते हैं वो, पेस्ट. ये हमारा जिप, और ओपन विद आर विनजिप. ठीक है. अरे कैसी बात कर दी, हम खरीदेंगे कुछ. आर्काइव यूटिलिटी, मस्त. ये आ गया हमारा प्रोजेक्ट, इसकी हमें ज़रूरत नहीं है, इसको हटा देते हैं. ठीक है, ओके. अब इसको हम ओपन करेंगे VS कोड में. आ जाओ भाई VS कोड, ओपन फोल्डर, और ओपन फोल्डर में स्प्रिंग बूट एप्स के अंदर डेमो ऐप हमने ओपन कर ली. आर वी हैप्पी? यप. ठीक है, कूल है. करो जी, अब आगे बताओ.
I will just open that project now in my IDE. Now you can use any IDE here. You can use Eclipse, you can use VS Code, you can use IntelliJ IDEA community version or the Ultimate version. So I'm using a community version here. Just to show you the proof, I will click on Not Update. I will click on About.
We
and you can
trust
see
you.
this is a community version. And I will click on Open the project. So this is the project which I've downloaded. Click on Open and voila, you got your
Voila.
project. And the beauty is, if I expand the dependencies, I think it will take some time to download. Okay, download.
External libraries, do we have them? Maven properties, target, test, classes, com, demo class, src, main, test. हमने मेवन पे क्लिक किया था ना, maven.cmd, ये है. ठीक है, देखते हैं, इसको एक बार बंद करते हैं.
Download it.
External
Too fast.
libraries.
And you can see that added so many dependencies here. For the Jackson, for JSON conversion, we got micrometer for observing. We got Tomcat. You can see we got embedded Tomcat. So basically you don't need to have the external Tomcat here. And if you go down, we got Spring Boot, but also we got Spring Framework. You can see we got Spring Code. So all the things which are required for Spring Code or Spring Project, we got it here. Okay.
Must.
Let me just drop it here. And now let me create a hello world. So what I will do is just to create hello world. Now, if you have worked with Servlet or any other language before, basically we do multiple steps, right? But let me show you the code in Spring, which will print hello world. I'm not going to explain everything in this video, how Spring Web works. We have a separate section on that.
Okay.
But just to show you how to build application, I will get a class and I will name this class as hello. I will just simply say hello. And then I will just
थामो थामो, हम भी साथ चलेंगे, साथ चलना पड़ेगा क्योंकि अब एक्सप्लेन नहीं करोगे कुछ भी। तो मेन जावा डेमो एप्लीकेशन जहाँ है हमारी, वहाँ पे एक नया, हेलो, ओके, आई जस्ट
return. I will create a method here, and this method is responsible to print hello world on the screen. So I will say public string. I will simply say greet, and this will return hello world.
okay, public string greet, and this will simply return, oh, रुको रुको, and this will simply return hello world. तो return, ठीक है, डन, ओके, बताओ आगे।
A very simple method, right? Nothing fancy for server. A simple class is just that if you want this to work, you simply say here REST controller, and we have to map it with, again, I'm not explaining it here. We have a detailed topic on this. What is request mapping? What is REST controller? We'll talk about it. At this point, just go for 2 annotations and say, I will say slash. So
ठीक है, हम बना देते हैं हम भी। इसको बनाया हमने रेस्ट कंट्रोलर, और इंपोर्ट हो गया, बढ़िया। और यहाँ पे हम कर रहे हैं रिक्वेस्ट मैपिंग, और किस राउट पे जाए और ये चले होम पेज पे। ठीक है, हम डिटेल में पढ़ लेंगे एक बार साथ में ही। Okay.
Basically, whenever you request on the home page, it will return the hello world. That's what I want. Or maybe I can say hello world, welcome to Telesco.
हम भी लिखेंगे कुछ इसी तरह का। यार तेलेस्कोप बहुत अच्छा नाम है, हमारा कोई नाम नहीं है ऐसा। हेलो वर्ल्ड, वेलकम टू अक्षय, ठीक है, वेलकम टू ई कॉमर्स कर देते हैं फिलहाल के लिए। कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता, मैसेज है भाई, ऐसे हम दिल पे नहीं ले सकते मैसेज को। ठीक है,
Okay, cool. And now let's run this. How do we run this? So you
How
go back
do
to
we
your
run this?
application, the main file, and simply say run. Behind the scene, it will, of course, compile the code. It will run this on a Tomcat. Just have a look. And when you run for the first time, it will print this Spring pattern here. You can change it if you want. But we are concerned about this, or we want to focus on this. So Tomcat started on port number 8080. Nowhere externally I'm using Tomcat, okay? A very simple stuff. And I'm saying run on 8080, I got it. How do I test it? Of course, you can use a REST client like Postman, or I will just open the browser, and here I will say localhost colon 8080, enter, and if
वेलकम टू टेस्को।
you can see, we got the answer.
हम भी रुको, क्या किया, डेमो एप्लीकेशन को सिंपली रन कर दिया। ठीक है, हमने भी कर दिया। स्प्रिंग जैसा लिखा हुआ आता है, आ गया, बढ़िया। और वी आर इंटरेस्टेड अबाउट टॉमकैट बोला था, टॉमकैट इनिशियलाइज विद पोर्ट 8080, ओके, हमारा भी आ गया। ठीक है, टॉमकैट स्टार्टेड ऑन पोर्ट 8080, तो यहाँ इनिशियलाइज हुआ 8080 पे, और यहाँ स्टार्ट हुआ। अब क्या करना है, ब्राउज़र पे जाना है और साइड में लोकल होस्ट 8080, नाइस। खुशी है क्या हमें? हाँ, हमारा भी आया, वेलकम टू ई कॉमर्स। नाम रखेंगे हम अपने ई कॉमर्स का कुछ तो बढ़िया सा। कमेंट्स में बताओ कि हमारे ई कॉमर्स का क्या नाम होना चाहिए, उसकी बेसिस पे हम लोग प्रोजेक्ट बना देंगे। क्रेजी ड्रीम IA द पर्सन वाचिंग वीडियो। हाँ, हम सीख रहे हैं ना, तो ऐसे ही सीखते हैं हम लोग यार। ओके, आगे
We
बढ़ते
got
हैं।
response, which is hello world, welcome to the Disco. It's so simple, right? And how much time it took me to run this? Of course, I was talking to the camera and doing this, so it took a lot of time. But if you want to do this, you can do that in minutes. So you got your application up and running in minutes. That's not the case with
सही है।
Spring Framework, and you will see that once we start with Spring later. So this is Spring Boot. Behind the scene, it is still Spring Framework. Now the question is it better than Spring?
हाँ,
Of course, right? It will help you. But there are certain
इनबिल्ट
issues with
टॉमकेट है हमारे
Spring Boot
पास.
as well. Of course, not a big issue. One of the issue is by default, it will do a lot of stuff for you. So it basically follows convention over configuration because in Spring, we do a lot of configuration. Here, it says, I will give you stuff. You tell me what you want, I will give it to you. And most of the time, it also gives you certain things which you don't want.
एक मिनट. यूनिक for our e-commerce Spring Boot project. भाई मेक द नेम अर्बन ई कॉमर्स. ठीक है. अभी पहले हमारे पास सजेशन आया तो हम इस नाम से जाते हैं. कुछ सुना सुना सा लग रहा है. ओके, हमने यहाँ अपडेट किया. वो हाँ सही है. ये भी टेस्ट हो जाएगा कि हाथों हाथ अपडेट होता है क्या. ऑफ कोर्स नहीं होता है. ओके, तो हम इसको रीस्टार्ट कर देते हैं. वापस से स्प्रिंग आया. वापस से हमारा टॉमकैट इनिशियलाइज हुआ 8080 पे और स्टार्ट हो गया 8080 पे. कूल. हम गए यहाँ पे, हमने ये किया अर्बन ई कॉमर्स. अर्बन ई कॉमर्स नाम रखा था क्या. अर्बन ई कॉमर्स. ठीक है कोई बात नहीं यार. अर्बन ई कॉम रख देते हैं नाम. ओके. इनिशियलाइज स्टार्टेड हो गया. तो अब हमें जाना है वापस अर्बन ई कॉम. मस्त. ठीक है जी.
Want. Example, if you expand this libraries here, there are so many things. Maybe I will not even going to use this, but Spring Boot says, take it. Okay, so that's one. Next,
अच्छा.
since it gives you a lot of default stuff, if you want to configure, then of course you have to do those configuration by yourself. That means if you want more control, it is better to work with Spring Framework than Spring Boot. Again, debatable. Personally, I prefer Spring Boot. If I want to work on a project, I'm happy to do the configuration in Spring Boot. But yeah, people might prefer Spring Framework for that reason. It's still debatable, but
कुल मिला के स्प्रिंग फ्रेमवर्क में कॉन्फ़िगर करके हम चीज़ें लाएंगे और स्प्रिंग बूट बोल रहा है कि यार इन चीज़ों की तुम्हें ज़रूरत पड़ेगी और तुम रख लो. क्या प्रेफर करोगे कि हम रख लेंगे और फिर हटा देंगे चीज़ें, या फिर हम लाएंगे ही वो चीज़ें जो हमें चाहिए होंगी. मैं शायद प्रेफर करूँगा कि हम रख लेंगे सारी चीज़ें और फिर हटाते रहेंगे. कोई बात नहीं है उसमें. ओके, सेम रीज़न होगा शायद तेलेस्को का भी कि स्प्रिंग बूट पे जाओ, क्योंकि वो रिक्वायर्ड के साथ कुछ एक्स्ट्रा चीज़ें देगा तो उसको तुम आराम से रिमूव कर सकते हो. कूल है.
Spring Boot is awesome.
ऑसम.
So yeah, that's one of the issue.
Awesome
And
कैसे responsive
yeah,
है.
that's about it. I wanted to show you what is Spring Boot and people who cry about Java being
भाई तेलेस्को इज बायस टू स्प्रिंग बूट. मैं कमेंट कर देता हूँ. ओके, जोक है ये, जोक है. ओके, कमेंटेड. चलो जी आगे बढ़ते हैं.
being slow, Java being verbose. Spring Boot is here. It will make your work easy. Let's try to implement dependency injection using Spring Boot. Now, till this point, we have talked about what is dependency injection. We have talked about what is Spring Boot. And then we have also created a simple project with the help of the Spring Initializer. And we got the web project, but we are not going to use this project. Basically, let's create a new project.
स्प्रिंग बूट इज बेटर है ना, क्योंकि कॉन्फ़िगरेशन हमें करके दे रहा है और सर्वर हमें करके दे रहा है. राइट. कोजी ड्रीम. ओके, यही रीज़न है ना यार, या और भी कोई रीज़न है. क्योंकि वो हमें इनबिल्ट हमें एक तो टॉमकैट दे रहा है, या फिर हमें अलग से कॉन्फ़िगर करना पड़ता है अपने सर्वर को, प्लस मेवन संभाल रहा है हमारी डिपेंडेंसीज. तो ये मेवन भी इनबिल्ट करके दे रहा है हमें स्प्रिंग बूट में. ये दो रीज़न मुझे अभी तक समझ में आया. इसके अलावा मुझे कुछ दिखा नहीं है. स्प्रिंग इज़ ऑसम वाली बात, क्योंकि अभी वो दिखेगी.
without the web, and let's try to implement dependency injection. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, first of all, let's create the simple project. For that, I'm going to go to start.spring.io, and here let's create a new project. So I will click on Maven, and I'm going to select Java here. The version is 3.2.5. Group ID is Tarisco. Project name is my app. Of course, this can be anything, but let's say my app. The Java version I have is 21, so, and the jar packaging. I'm not going to add any dependency, because when you say you want to go for web, you have to add web dependency. But if you don't add any dependency, you will get a default Spring Boot options. I will click on generate, and you can see we got the download, and I've also unzipped it. Now it's time to open that in the IDE. So we got this IntelliJ IDEA community version. I will simply open that project. So this is the project which I got just now, and I will click on open in this window. Yeah. Okay. So now you can see this is a default project, nothing fancy. There's no web part here. If you go to the pom.xml, we just got the Spring Boot starter, nothing fancy, a simple dependency.
हमने लिया है ऑलरेडी, तो हम देख लेते हैं हमारी पॉम में क्या है भाई. पॉम फाइल इज फॉर मेवन आई थिंक, है ना. डिपेंडेंसीज बेसिकली, तो स्प्रिंग बूट हमें मिल गया, स्प्रिंग बूट स्टार्टर पेरेंट हमें मिला. फिर यहाँ पे हमारे प्रॉपर्टीज़ हो गए कि जावा कौन सा वर्जन यूज़ कर रहे हैं, कूल है. और यहाँ हमारे डिपेंडेंसी स्टार्ट हो गए. तो हमने वेब डिपेंडेंसी लिया था, एक ही टेस्ट हमारे पास आया है, मेवन प्लगइन हमको मिला है, ये तो बिल्ड है. तो 2 डिपेंडेंसी हमें इनबिल्ड मिली है. ठीक है, बताओ आपको कौन सी मिली भाई.
राइट.
स्प्रिंग बूट स्टार्टर डिपेंडेंसी हमें मिली, हमें स्प्रिंग बूट स्टार्टर वेब डिपेंडेंसी मिली, स्टार्टर नहीं मिली. ओके.
Now, what I want to do is let's experiment with dependency injection. And we have talked about dependency injection before. Basically, when you have dependencies in one class, normally what you do is you create the object of it. Now we want to inject it. How we do that? So let's create a main code. So we already have a main file here. So you can see we have a class, and it says my app application, weird name, but that's fine for us. And then we are saying public static void main. This is your main code, which takes the string arguments. And here we are running a Spring application. So what it does is here, so when you say Spring application.run, it basically creates a container. Okay, now you'll be saying, what is container here? See, what happens is when you talk about your project, so let's say this is your project. In this project, you have a lot of classes. So let's say you have 1 class, 2 class, 3 class, 4 class, and let's say you have multiple classes here. And now you are saying, hey, Spring Framework, it is your job to create object of this. Spring will say, okay, that's my job, I will do it. But question is, where exactly Spring will do it? Of course, objects are created inside the JVM. So you'll be having this big box here of JVM. I mean, this is your project. This is JVM, and this is where you create all the objects. Now, when you talk about Spring, Spring itself has its own container inside it. So Spring will have a container inside the JVM, and they call this container as a IOC container. So this particular section here, this green box here, is called the IOC container.
IOC full form inversion of control. Okay, क्या काम है? डिपेंडेंसी खुद से क्रिएट करेगा. डिपेंडेंसी इंजेक्शन क्या है? उसका IOC का इम्प्लीमेंटेशन है. कूल.
Or you can say Spring container, that's fine. Now in this container, you create all the objects. So let's say from your project, you don't want object of all the classes. Let's say you got object for this, you got object for this. So these 2 classes, you want the object. And where exactly Spring will create the object? So Spring is going to create the object inside this. So this is where it will create the object. So it depends upon how many objects you want and which classes object you want. But this will create the object inside this container. That means when you want to run this application, the first thing you need is not the object, but this container. And this line here is responsible to create that container. So when you say Spring application.run, it will simply run that container for you. Okay. So we have the container ready, right? But then we want the object also, and for the objects we want class. So what I will do is I will create a very simple class here, and normally I call my participants, my students, as aliens. It's just that I believe that we don't live in this real world. We live in virtual world, not physically, but virtually, because we create virtual solutions, right? So we live in virtual world,
Nice.
and that's why I call Alien. And every time you see Alien on writing, imagine that's a developer. Or maybe I can also say dev if that is not an issue. So let's say dev. So let's say we have a dev class here. So in this world, we all are objects, right? I know that's not a good thing to objectify people, but let's say in this
ठीक है
example,
cool है हाँ
every developer is an object. So I'm an object, you're the object, and we came from the same class, let's say dev class. And what is your job? Your job is to code. So public void code. And that's our job. Or maybe instead of saying code, I will say build. That sounds much better, right? See, difference between coding and building is when you code, you write some statements, but will it run? There's no idea. But when you say build, you are actually building something. And now here, I'm going to print working on awesome project. Okay, just want to print something, and that's why I'm doing this. And this is what I want to call. So I want to call this method build. Now from where, of course, the execution starts from the main. The question is how I'm going to call. Okay, let me just put that in side by side so that you can see it. So this is the method I want to call. So this build method I want to call from here. Of course, the way you can do that is you can go here and you can call build. Will this work? Of course not. We know in Java, if you want to call this obj, you will be called run. It will create the object of dev, and you can see we got the statement which is working on the awesome project. Is it a good idea? Of course, it works, and basically this is what we should do when you don't use Spring. Basically, you create the object by yourself. But the idea behind Spring framework is you don't have to manage the objects. Spring will do it for you. Because when you say new dev here, what you're doing is you are manually creating an object inside the JVM, but not in the container. That means when you create this object, it is your responsibility to manage the entire cycle of it. We don't want to do that. We don't want to create this object by ourselves. We want Spring to create it. And how will you do that? It's very simple. Now, since this is a Spring project, I'm assuming that Spring might be creating the object behind the scene. I just have to use it, right? Maybe the object is already there. Maybe this is the object is already there. Why you have to create a new object for dev? So in that case, what I will do is I will not be creating this object. So I will not say new dev because that's what creates the object. But if I remove it, you know, your compiler is giving you some bad words. Compiler says, hey, what you doing? Variable obj might not have been initialized. Okay. So we have to initialize it. And one way to do that is just to fake your ID, your compiler, you can say null. And your ID is now very happy. At least you have assigned something. But of course, when you run this, you will get one of the most famous error in the world, and we love it.
null pointer
I'm just kidding. And the error is the null pointer exception. We don't want that, right? So how do we do this? Assigning null is not a good idea. So we can get this object from the container. Now question is, how do you talk to the container? Because now you
एक सेकंड अभी एक नोटिफिकेशन आया 1 मिनट रुकना यार शायद मैंने कुछ मिस्टेक्स किए हैं 1 मिनट दो मुझे हाँ जी सॉरी मुझे पता नहीं मेरी मिस्टेक सॉल्व हुई या नहीं बट ठीक है भाई आर यू अ बीटेक स्टूडेंट नहीं यार आई एम सॉफ्टवेयर डेवलपर आई एम लाइक एम्प्लॉयड वर्किंग इन अ कंपनी अभी आई एम नॉट वर्किंग ऑन जावा आई यूज टू वर्क ऑन जावा इन स्टार्टिंग then I moved to SFCC and now I'm trying to move back to Java. So I'm learning everything online so that I can also rewatch it and also all the people like me who want to understand the concept और जो मेरी तरह समझते हैं they can also join along and like learn everything. So that's the whole concept. Okay. कंपनी नेम, अरे यार ये हमेशा मेरा ऐसा होता है. सेपिएंट, पब्लिसिस्ट सेपिएंट, गुड़गांव. कूल. ठीक है, आगे बढ़ते हैं.
Are in this main code, container is there with the JVM. How will you talk to the container? We want to get a hold on it. How will you get the hold on it? Maybe we can get a
बताओ.
reference of it, right? So if you can get a reference of the container, you're good to go. So basically, the type of this container here, so let's say the type of this IOC container is of type application context. So the type of this particular object, of course, right, this is an object. Even the container inside your JVM, which is your IOC container itself, is an object, right? So for that object, there should be some type, and the type is application context. So what if you can simply get application context, and you can see it came from the Spring Framework, application context from Spring Framework.context, and we can use the reference of it. I can say context equal to, okay, we have to get the object for this. Now this is weird, right? Because ultimately we are saying we don't want to get the object, but now it says we have to get the object. See, not exactly. See, application context will work only when you create the object of it, right? But what if I can get the object from Spring itself? Remember when we talked about this particular line at the start, and I told you that this particular line creates the container for you? It does. Example, if I click on this run here, you can see this run method returns the object. So I just went to the source code of it. Basically, I've decompiled the file with the help of IDE. And this run method, which we are calling of Spring application.class, it basically returns the object of configurable application context. If I go here, it returns the object, it extends the interface called application context. That means this run is returning you the object of application context.
Cool.
That means we already have the object. So what you have to do is you just get this, put it here, and say equal to. So what we are doing is we are assigning this object which returns from run to the context. Once that is done, I can simply use the context and say, so context has multiple methods here. And you tell me, looking at this in the comments, before you, when I go forward, I will take a pause, which method you are going to use to get that object. Pause the video, let me know in the comments. Okay, so I hope you have entered the answer. So it's actually the get bean. So in the get bean, you have to mention which class of
How could you manage both? यार, we have no other options. अभी करना है तो करना है, मतलब वो वाला गेम है, ये वाला कुछ ऐसे ही है.
object you want. So I want the object of alien class. That's it. So
Okay. कुल मिला के हमने किया क्या कि हमने ऑलरेडी स्प्रिंग एप्लीकेशंस डॉट रन जो हमारा है ये देख लिया कि ये क्या है. ये रन हम देख सकते हैं, यहीं देखना पड़ेगा ना हमें. ओके, स्प्रिंग बूट एप्लीकेशन के अंदर कॉन्फ़िगरेबल कॉन्टेक्स्ट एप्लीकेशन कॉन्टेक्स्ट, ये है हमारे किसी काम का. देखें ज़रा, इसके अंदर है एप्लीकेशन कॉन्टेक्स्ट, और हम अगर इसके अंदर जाएंगे तो गेट आईडी, गेट एप्लीकेशन नेम और ये सब मिलता है. तो बेसिकली हम इसको यूज़ करेंगे. कहाँ गया, थोड़ा क्लास देखो, एप्लीकेशन कॉन्टेक्स्ट इंटरफेस का. ठीक है, कूल है, ये हम यूज़ कर सकते हैं, हम कर लेते हैं. इसको बंद कर देता हूँ मैं. तो चलो, एक और चीज़ हो गई कि हमें भी अगर डॉक्यूमेंटेशन देखना है तो हम भी देख सकते हैं. तो इट इज़ गुड. तो हमने एप्लीकेशन कॉन्टेक्स्ट लिया, इसको कॉन्टेक्स्ट से असाइन किया. क्या परेशानी है? अच्छा, ओके, अननोन टाइप मत रहो यार. क्रिएट क्यों करना है? इंपोर्ट करो ना. कॉन्टेक्स्ट के अंदर है, इंपोर्ट कर भाई, क्या हो गया? कॉन्टेक्स्ट वाली, ठीक है. और फिर उसके बाद हमने एक डेव बनाई थी, बिल्ड यूज़ किया था, कोई ना हम ग्रीट यूज़ कर लेंगे इसका। GREAT होता है ग्रीट। या GR होता है ना। एक मिनट, क्या नूब चीज़ों में अटकते हैं यार अपन। तो होता है। ठीक है ठीक है ठीक है ठीक है। आओ वापस आओ। GREET। तो वहाँ पे डेव का बिल्ड यूज़ किया, हम लोग ये यूज़ कर लेंगे, कोई इसमें इशू नहीं है। यहाँ पे हम आए, हमने बोला कि हमारे कॉन्टेक्स्ट में गेट बीन्स यूज़ करो, और यार एक वो बना दो, क्लास है ना,
Not alien. We are not going for alien anymore. We are going for dev.
डेव, ओके, और वी आर गोइंग फॉर हेलो क्लास। ये ढूंढना ज़रा, ये मिल जाए तो बढ़िया मज़ा आ जाएगा। ये हमारा कोड हुआ, ओके।
Okay. So you can see
और इसका वो मेथड यूज़ करना है। तो इसका मेथड यूज़ करने का मतलब कि हमने हेलो का इंस्टेंस इस तरह बनाया, ठीक है। गेट बीन कर लिया बेसिकली हमने, ठीक है ठीक है ठीक है ठीक है। और हेलो का कौन सा मेथड है हमारा, ग्रीट, तो वो हमने कर दिया इसे। चलो ठीक है, एक बार चलाते हैं, इसको क्लियर कर देता हूँ मैं। और चलाया तो कहाँ है ये, 08 पे होगा क्या, यहीं पे प्रिंट होगा, ओके। क्योंकि रेस्ट बना लिया हमने इसलिए, मे बी एक हम भी डेव बना लेते हैं, रुको। कूल भाई, कीप गोइंग, थैंक यू ब्रो, थैंक यू सो मच। भी बना लेते हैं डेव जावा, और डेव क्या करता है हमारा, इसके अंदर एक पब्लिक वॉइड बिल्ड मेथड है, थिंग्स बिल्ड करता है, और ऐसा आउट, और यहाँ पे आता है हमारा ओके, आई एम डेवलपर, आई बिल्ड थिंग्स। ठीक है, अब हमने डेमो एप्लीकेशन में कॉन्टेक्स्ट में हेलो की जगह ले लिया डेव को, और यहाँ पे डेव लिया, डेवियन इसका नाम, क्या बात हो गई, इसको इसके अंदर डालो यार। डेव को डेव डेव, और इसे हटाओ, ये नहीं चाहिए, हमें चाहिए डेव डॉट बिल्ड, और डेव डॉट बिल्ड में क्या है, सिंपल एक ऐसा आउट है, ओके। तो इसको रिफ्रेश किया, अच्छा अच्छा अच्छा, नो क्वालिफाइंग बीन्स, फर्स्ट प्रोजेक्ट डेमो अवेलेबल, डेमो अवेलेबल नहीं क्या भाई, मे बी वापस करते हैं, रुको। नो सच बीन डेफिनेशन एक्सेप्शन, अच्छा जी, इसको बंद करो। नो सच बीन डेफिनेशन डेव डॉट क्लास हमने ले ली यहाँ पे, और इसको एक बार वापस लिख देते हैं, कोई बात नहीं। तो हमारा कॉन्टेक्स्ट जो है डॉट गेट बीन हमने लिया, यहाँ पे हमने क्लास दी, क्लास हमारी क्या है, डेव डॉट क्लास, और डेव डॉट क्लास के बाद हमने इसको स्टोर किया डेव में, के, और फिर उसके बाद डेव डॉट बिल्ड हमने कॉल कर लिया। तो हमने न्यू की जगह इस कॉन्टेक्स्ट से उठा लिया, कि क्या पता स्प्रिंग बूट एप्लीकेशन ने ऑलरेडी उसे हमारे आईओसी में बना दिया हो, आईओसी एरिया। ठीक है जी, अब एक बार वापस क्लियर करते हैं। और रन करते हैं। नो क्वालिफाइंग बीन, ये है। क्या किया क्या किया क्या किया, क्या गलत किया
We
हमने?
are saying that I want the object of dev. Who has created the object? It is Spring. That's what I'm assuming, that the object is there in the container. I just have to use it. And I'm doing the coding for that. So now this will give me the object which is existing. I'm
अच्छा,
assuming that it is there and I'm fetching it. Let's see if that works. I will run this. And if you see, we got an error.
थैंक यू भाई। मुझे लगा कि भाई अटक गए अटक गए। सही है, बताओ।
It says no qualifying bean of type com._.myapp.dev.
ऐसा
Oh,
कुछ
okay. So we
annotation
don't
कभी
have
नहीं
this
है।
object in the container. I was assuming that there's an object, but it's not there. Container is there for sure because this is what creates the container. But inside the container, the object is not there, and the entire video got wasted is because Spring says I'm not going to create the object. Why it is not creating the object? Now, if you remember, in the one of the topic or one of the video we have mentioned that Spring by default will not create object of all the classes, and we don't even want it. Because if Spring creates object of all the classes, and if you have 100 or 1,000 classes, we don't want the JVM to be burdened with all these objects, which we're not going to even use it. And that's why Spring says, I'm not going to create the object by default. You tell me which class objects you want. And whatever you say, I will create the object. And the question is, how will you talk to Spring Framework? Maybe you need a config class, or in the Spring Boot, or we can use Java-based configuration. We can actually use something called an annotation. So on top of your class,
component।
whichever class object you want, just say this class is a component. Just by mentioning this annotation here, your Spring understands that this is the class which I have to manage. So this is a managed bean. What it means is Spring will create the object for you in the container. So the moment you say component, Spring says, now I know what's my job. My job is to create the object. I will do it for you. And now let's see, just by adding that component annotation, is it working? Let's relaunch the
हम भी रिलॉन्च करते हैं, रुको। रिलॉन्च ये क्लियर कर देता हूँ एक बार। कूल। ओके, आई एम अ डेवलपर, आई बिल्ड थिंग्स। प्रिंट हो गया, तो हमारा मेथड इसका कॉल हो गया, बिल्ड। ओके, तो इसका मतलब हमें अगर किसी को भी, अगर हमें बेसिकली अगर हमें स्प्रिंग बूट को बोलना है कि भाई हमारी क्लास मैनेज करो, या इसके अगर ऑब्जेक्ट बनते तो तुम मैनेज करो, तो हमें उसमें कंपोनेंट ऐड करना पड़ेगा, ये एनोटेशन। कूल, ठीक है। आई थिंक आज के लिए काफ़ी हो गया है। तो ऑटो वायर का कॉन्सेप्ट जो नेक्स्ट स्टार्ट होगा वो हम कल से स्टार्ट करते हैं, और आज चलते हैं। ओके देन। मज़ा आया भाई, स्प्रिंग बूट स्टार्ट हो चुका है तो अच्छा ही लग रहा है, और तिलस्कू ने पकड़ा भी बहुत अच्छे से हुआ है, एक एक चीज़ बढ़िया। ये तरीका मुझे बहुत पसंद है कि एरर ला के बताओ, एरर दिखा के जब बताते रहो क्या हो गया। एरर दिखा के अगर आप बताते हो ना, तो एरर भी याद रहती है। अब मुझे ज़िंदगी में याद रहेगा कि अगर नो बीन का मेरे पास एरर आ रहा है, तो इसका मतलब मुझे कंपोनेंट या एनोटेशन मिसिंग है। ठीक है यार, बढ़िया। तो मिलते हैं कल, इसको आगे बढ़ाएंगे और समझते हैं स्प्रिंग बूट को इसके आगे। ठीक है देन, टाटा सी यू, बाय बाय, गुड नाइट।